welcome back to our channel, where we'll be exploring the heart of Genoa together. Today is a great day to unravel the complex web of secrets, trauma, and redemption that's gripping us all. The plot unfolds with intense tension during Matt's trial. Let's step into the shadows of the latest shocking developments. The atmosphere in Genoa City has never been thicker with tension than it is right now, following the dramatic and psychologically harrowing trial of Matt Clark. Newman Newman, acting out of a desperate need to protect his family and unearth the truth, orchestrated a highly controversial and emotionally charged plan. He recreated a version of the infamous Shadow Room right here in Genoa City, a physical manifestation of the dark, twisted past that has haunted the Newman family for years. This was not merely a physical space, it was a psychological trigger designed with surgical precision to shatter the fragile walls of Matt Clark's amnesia. No one knew that the only way to neutralize the threat Matt posed was to force him to confront the demons he had buried. The sheer audacity of this plan speaks volumes about the generational trauma inflicted by Matt, pushing Noah to adopt extreme measures to reclaim his family's peace of mind. When Nick Newman escorted Matt into that meticulously reconstructed room, the air must have felt suffocatingly heavy. Nick, a man who has endured unimaginable physical and psychological torture at the hands of this very antagonist, was walking a tightrope between vengeance and justice. As they crossed the threshold, the sensory triggers of the Shadow Room, the lighting, the layout, the oppressive silence acted as a catalyst, the psychological dam broke. We witnessed the exact, terrifying moment when Matt's suppressed memories flooded back into his conscious mind. It was not a gradual awakening, but a violent, overwhelming tsunami of recollection. Every horrific act, every manipulation, every moment of terror he inflicted upon Nick, Sharon Newman, and Sienna Bacall came rushing back with visceral clarity. The sheer weight of his own sins crashed down upon him, leaving the viewers breathless as they watched a man mentally disintegrate under the crushing reality of his own monstrous past. What followed was a profound display of psychological horror, not from the victims, but from the perpetrator himself. Matt Clark, the man who had previously orchestrated his cruelty with chilling confidence, was suddenly paralyzed by an overwhelming sense of disgust. As the memories of his violent assaults and psychological warfare replayed in his mind, his reaction was one of pure, unadulterated revulsion. He was looking at his past self as if viewing a stranger, a monster he could not comprehend. This is a fascinating psychological phenomenon. When the amnesiac barrier fell, the current, somewhat neutralized version of Matt was forced to integrate with the sociopathic predator of his past. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. He finally understood, with agonizing clarity, exactly why the Newman family and everyone else in Genoa City despised him with such venomous intensity. The hatred directed at him was no longer a mystery. It was a justified reflection of his own abhorrent actions. In my opinion, this is how Matt Clark is protecting himself from pain, by completely dissociating his current conscious self from the monster who committed those atrocities. He is experiencing a profound psychological splitting. By feeling absolute disgust and self-hatred, he is desperately trying to signal to himself and others that he is no longer that man. The overwhelming remorse he is projecting is a defense mechanism against the unbearable guilt that would otherwise destroy his mind entirely. If he were to fully accept that he and the monster are one and the same, the psychological weight would be fatal. Therefore, his intense self-loathing is both a genuine reaction to his recovered memories and a subconscious strategy to distance his current identity from his past crimes. He is drowning in the realization of his own depravity, and this self-flagellation is his only remaining lifeline. Nick Newman stood witness to this profound breakdown, and the complexity of his reaction cannot be overstated. For years, Nick has harbored a primal, justified rage toward Matt. He has wanted nothing more than to see this man suffer for the trauma inflicted upon his family, particularly the agonizing pain he caused Sharon. Yet, seeing Matt completely unravel, sobbing and dry heaving at the memory of his own sins, left Nick in a state of profound bewilderment. The satisfaction of vengeance was abruptly replaced by an unsettling confusion. How do you punish a man who is already executing himself within the confines of his own mind? Nick's internal compass was spinning wildly. The enemy he had prepared to destroy was no longer a smug, calculating predator, but a broken, pathetic shell of a human being. This unexpected vulnerability from Matt forced Nick to confront the limits of his own desire for retribution, leaving him paralyzed in a gray area of morality and justice. Meanwhile, Sharon Newman's reaction is rooted in deep, unhealed trauma. For Sharon, the recovery of Matt's memories is not a cause for relief, but the ringing of a terrifying alarm bell. She has survived the unimaginable at his hands, enduring physical and psychological violations that have permanently scarred her soul. When she learned that Matt's memories had returned, her immediate, visceral fear was that the monster had also returned. Sharon knows better than anyone the deceptive, chameleonic nature of Matt Clark. She cannot simply trust a display of tears or a sudden proclamation of remorse. In her mind, this could easily be another elaborate manipulation, a new psychological game designed to lower their defenses before he strikes again. Her PTSD is a protective shield, screaming at her to reject his remorse and prepare for the worst. The trauma he inflicted is too deep for her to ever view him as anything other than a lethal threat to her family's safety. In my opinion, this is how Sharon Newman is protecting herself from pain by anchoring herself to her fear and refusing to acknowledge any humanity in Matt Clark. If she were to believe that his remorse is genuine, she would have to process the complex, confusing emotion of empathy for her abuser. That is a psychological bridge she simply cannot cross. By maintaining the belief that the monster is merely hiding behind a mask of tears, she keeps her emotional armor intact. Her skepticism is her survival mechanism. She is projecting her past trauma onto his current breakdown, ensuring that she remains vigilant and emotionally detached. To forgive him, or even to pity him, would require reopening wounds that she has spent years trying to stitch closed. Her absolute refusal to trust his breakdown is the only way she can maintain her sanity in the face of his terrifying return. Sienna Bacall's perspective adds a fascinating and entirely different layer of complexity to this unfolding drama. Sienna knew a different version of this man. She knew him as Mitch McCall. Her relationship with him was built on a foundation of shared experiences in the Las Vegas underworld, far removed from the specific atrocities he committed against the Newman family in Genoa City. While she recognizes the danger he poses, she also notes a stark difference in his behavior. Matt did not subject Sienna to the same horrific, violent sexual assaults that he inflicted upon Sharon. Because her trauma is different, her lens is different. Watching Matt disintegrate in the Shadow Room replica, Sienna realized that the man weeping before them was completely unrecognizable from the Mitch McCall she thought she knew. The confident, albeit dangerous, man she partnered with was gone, replaced by a fractured entity that seemed entirely alien to her. It was Sienna who made the chillingly accurate observation that this current, broken version of Matt would never survive in prison. She understands the brutal, unforgiving ecosystem of the penal system. A man consumed by self-hatred, paralyzed by the sudden influx of horrific memories, and devoid of his former psychopathic confidence would be instantly victimized behind bars. Sienna's assessment is not necessarily born out of sympathy, but out of a cold, pragmatic understanding of human frailty. She sees a man whose psychological immune system has completely collapsed. The irony is staggering. The very justice the Newmans see clocking him away in a maximum security cell would likely result in his rapid demise, not because of the physical environment, but because his mind has already surrendered. Sienna recognizes that the Matt Clark standing before them is a dead man walking, crushed under the gravitational pull of his own recovered conscience. The climax of this psychological unraveling occurred during Matt's confrontation with the formidable Victor Newman. Victor, a man who views the world in absolute terms of loyalty and betrayal, power, and weakness, was met with a version of Matt he had never anticipated. Matt did not offer excuses, nor did he attempt to negotiate a truce. Instead, he looked the Newman patriarch in the eye and delivered a devastatingly bleak assessment of his own existence. Matt told Victor, with chilling sincerity, that the world would be a far better place without him in it. This was not a manipulation tactic. It was the raw, unfiltered expression of a man experiencing profound suicidal ideation. The weight of his recovered memories had convinced him that his life held no value, that his very existence was a toxic blight on the people he had harmed. To hear such absolute defeat from a man who once orchestrated grand, destructive schemes left even the stoic Victor Newman momentarily unsettled. In my opinion, this is how Victor Newman is protecting himself from pain, by maintaining his stoic, impenetrable facade even when faced with the total psychological collapse of his enemy. Victor's entire identity is built on strength and control. To show pity or empathy for Matt Clark would feel like a betrayal of his children, Nick and Victoria, and his wife, Nikki. Therefore, Victor processes Matt's suicidal confession through a lens of cold calculation. He refuses to engage with the emotional weight of Matt's words, instead viewing them as the final surrender of a defeated opponent. By emotionally detaching himself from Matt's suffering, Victor insulates himself from the messy, complicated reality of human redemption and despair. He protects his family's narrative by ensuring that Matt remains the villain, even as Matt actively seeks his own destruction. Victor's coldness is his armor against the chaotic unpredictability of a broken man's conscience. Despite his overwhelming self-hatred and his belief that he deserves to die, a tiny, flickering spark of humanity remains within Matt Clark. He expressed a desperate, agonizing desire to find some form of redemption before his inevitable end. He told Victor that he wants to do at least one genuinely good deed before he dies. This plea for a final act of grace adds a heartbreaking dimension to his character arc. It raises profound philosophical questions about the nature of evil and the possibility of atonement. Can a man who has committed such heinous, unforgivable acts ever balance the cosmic scales with a single good deed? What could he possibly offer the Newman family or the world that would hold enough weight to counter the decades of trauma he has inflicted? His desire to do good is born out of a desperate need to prove to himself that he is not entirely composed of darkness, that there is some small fragment of light buried beneath the monster he became. The entire town of Genoa City now waits with bated breath to see what this one good deed will entail. Will he offer crucial evidence that could save someone else? Will he sacrifice himself to protect Nick or Sharon from a new, unforeseen threat? Or is this final wish simply a delusion of a dying mind, a futile attempt to grasp at a redemption that is forever out of reach? The tension is palpable because a man who has nothing left to lose, and who actively seeks his own end, is capable of extraordinary things both incredibly heroic and incredibly tragic. The Newman family must now navigate the dangerous waters of dealing with a remorseful monster. They cannot trust him, yet they cannot entirely ignore the potential value of his final, desperate offering. His journey from a calculating predator to a broken penitent is one of the most compelling psychological transformations we have ever witnessed in this town. As the dust settles in the replica of the Shadow Room, the emotional debris left behind is staggering. Noah's plan succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations, but the victory feels hollow, replaced by a heavy, suffocating sadness. The monster has been awakened, only to realize his own monstrous nature and recoil in horror. Matt Clark is a man trapped in a purgatory of his own making, haunted by the ghosts of his victims and crushed by the weight of his own sudden conscience. Whether he finds his elusive redemption or succumbs to the darkness that threatens to swallow him whole, his story serves as a chilling reminder of the destructive power of trauma and the agonizing, often impossible path to true repentance. Genoa City will never be the same, and we will be watching every moment of this tragic, compelling saga unfold.